Our presentation at lunch today is going to be inspiring leadership in the mining business. And our speaker is Dr. Nathan Wright. He's president of Transformational Performance Solutions. He is a former Chief Petty Officer and decorated Desert Storm veteran with the U.S. Navy. He holds a Bachelor of Science, a Master of Business Administration, and a Doctorate of Management with a focus on leadership styles. He has enjoyed an impressive career working for some of the nation's leading defense, mining, and manufacturing operations. How about a warm welcome for Dr. Wright?
All right. Well, thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. I appreciate all of you for giving me the opportunity to get up here and speak while you're eating lunch. Don't let me interrupt. You guys keep going. Just to share a little bit, some of you guys over the years have known me, so I'm going to share with the ones that don't that I'm a fourth generation miner. Not miner as in age, but copper miner. My grandfather and great-grandfather started out for Phelps Dodge in Bisbee, Arizona, and my dad worked for Phelps Dodge in Morenci, Arizona. So I am a Morenci High School graduate, for those of you that happen to know what that little town is. I'm not bragging, I'm just saying. And for the folks from Morenci, I am bragging. So, but yeah, I started out in Morenci, working in that, how should we say, growing up in that town site. And we had a smelter back in those days, 2 large smokestacks, and I grew up thinking that air had a flavor, you know, because there weren't a lot of the EPA regulations that we have today. So it wasn't until I got off to college at the University of Arizona that I realized that what fresh air was. So went to the University of Arizona, like I said, just a little bit of background, studied electrical engineering on a dad scholarship. My dad passed away, so I had to go join the Navy. And I appreciate the applause for that. That's why I put it in there, because it normally gets a good round of applause. Spent 11 years in the Navy, worked my way up through that chain of command, and that's actually where I first got involved with leadership development. It's a little bit different in the military for those of you that have served, and it's changed over the years. I have 2 children that are on active duty, and they tell me it's a little bit different. Got out of the Navy, I went to work for Phelps Dodge myself in Tyrone as an apprentice electrician. Came up through the ranks there until I made journeyman, then P&H Mining. Some of you guys may know that name. Hired me as a field engineer. Worked alongside those guys for a number of years until commodity prices kind of fell off, and then I went out and worked for Northrop Grumman, a defense contractor. That's where I started getting into my degrees, because Northrop required you to have a bachelor's degree to get promoted. So I pursued my bachelor's degree to get promoted by Northrop, and stayed with them for a little while until mining came back and ASARCO was willing to hire me, and that's where I met a few of these guys in this room. Went to work at ASARCO for a number of years, as first their electrical superintendent and then their electrical manager. Worked for a gentleman named Steve Holmes. Some of you may or may not know Steve, but he motivated me to pursue my MBA so that I could move on up the chain of command. So along the way, I've had a lot of good leaders motivate me to get the education and understanding. From there, I went to a company, became a corporate officer at Nearstar, which is an Australian company that mines zinc out in Tennessee, as their corporate asset manager. Pursued my doctoral degree with them. From there, I left and I went to work for Empire Southwest here in Arizona at Morenci as their general manager of operations. And at a point there, decided that I couldn't work and go to school at the same time, so I ended up pursuing my degree full time. And now I run around talking about leadership with folks, since that's what my degree's focus was in. So you know, my dissertation was actually on specifically leadership in mining. So I pulled all those years of experience and the education with those companies, and that parlayed into my leadership degree. So to start this off on talking about leadership, the first thing I always like to tell folks is that leaders do not have subordinates, okay? People say, well, then how can you be a leader, Nathan? While supervisors and managers are definitely in leadership positions, just by title doesn't make you a leader. In fact, when you are in a leadership position and you assume a role as a leader, you have to give up your authoritarian control, because in order to be a leader, you have to have followers, and followers are 100% a voluntary activity. Nobody follows you because of your title. Nobody follows you because they're made to follow you. They follow you because they want to follow you. So when you're selecting your leaders in your organization, first and foremost, you find somebody who can thrive in the position. And then from there, you have to give them opportunities to grow and develop into their position. That cannot be accomplished by a one-size-fits-all training program. You know, the number one reason that leadership development fails is because of training. Folks that are in training industries are ready to throw rocks at me, right? Yeah, most of the time we accept training as productive, and relatively it is not. Training and development have been used as, you know, the same, and there's a very big difference between training and development. And I know, like I said, I take some heat over it, but I've worked alongside a lot of leaders and myself experienced this, that you can't train somebody to be a leader, you have to develop them into it. And my problem with the training organizations is that most of the time it presumes that you have to be indoctrinated on a system, some kind of technique, some kind of a process, and in reality, like I said, it assumes that those things are all right, and in reality, you know, there's no training program that's going to get you there. It requires that you have somebody out there in the field coaching your people that have walked in their shoes and working with them at all times, not sending them to some 5-day class, sending them back out in the field and hoping that it sticks. Okay, glad in 2014, just to throw you guys some numbers, in 2014, businesses spend $170 billion on training. That's an awful lot of money on training, right? Most of the training techniques that are used out there are very unsuccessful for human beings. They're classroom driven. Somebody standing up in front of you, thundering away to a group of people sitting in chairs. They put out a general principle of some kind, and then they step you through some kind of an application. Sometimes it's a generic application. Maybe it's tailored a little bit towards your operations. But definitely it's one person speaking and a whole bunch of persons listening. And I kind of like to have you guys look back into any baby that you've ever been around. If you take a baby and you throw it into a high chair and you thunder away at it, it's not going to learn anything, correct? They learn by falling down because they feel it, they put it in their mouth and they taste it or they touch it in some way. And that's how humans learn. Not just babies, I'm not calling us babies, I'm just saying that's how we learn as human beings. So putting somebody in a classroom just on its own would tell you that's not going to be an effective way for you to build your leadership. Your leadership, folks, has to be through a development process with very specific and relevant situations that you put them in, and then you offer them the opportunity to reflect on those. Either self-reflection or coached reflection, which in the case of the baby, normally that's a parent or a caregiver. Currently, the practices that are used in most training programs are very good for the trainers and the consultants selling them to you, but they're not so good for the folks that you're trying to develop as leaders. You know, a lot of the training programs, I'll throw some out there for you, they talk about situational leadership, servant leadership, authentic leadership, 7 habits of effective people. And basically, if you look at all forms of leadership and all those wonderful buzzwords, they boil down to work that was done by a guy in the early 70s named James Burns, and it was called transactional and transformational leadership. So what they've done is consultants and trainers have gone out there, they've taken the root of proper development of folks, twisted it into some kind of a book or some kind of a process that they could sell to folks. And that's not necessarily the most effective way to get your leaders developed. Coaching is the key to development with all of your leaders. So of that $170 billion that we discussed just a few moments ago, 93% of that is being spent on senior leadership training. It's the folks that are at your highest levels of your organizations. And so only 7% of that money is being spent on your frontline leaders. And we all know that value is added in our organizations at the point of use where you're getting your product. So 7% of that money is being focused at point of use with the types of leaders that you need to motivate your employees, to maintain profitability, and to maintain the effectiveness. So we need to do something to kind of flip where we're spending all of our money on leadership. And I use the difference. I said, training and development is kind of, they're being used as synonyms. Basically what training is it's a blending of norms, okay? It's about focusing on the present and maintaining status quo. That's what training is for you. Whereas development, basically, it's looking towards the future, and it's a catalyst for innovation. So that's why when I say that training is the number one reason development fails, it's because we are trying to, as leaders in our organization, to innovate and to create, and the methods that we're using to attempt to do this are counterproductive. They are pushing us towards status quo. So another really big aspect to leadership is retention. I'm sure everybody in this room has battled with retaining employees, recruiting employees. The national average for industry is you have a 10% attrition. The national average in mining is 30% attrition. So we're losing people from our organizations at a greater rate than any other industry out there today. And I'm sure you're all suffering from that right now. That's nothing new, right? The Hay Group, there's some folks that run around taking these kinds of surveys. In 2012, they surveyed 1.7 million employees in 152 organizations, and they came back with the 6 reasons that people leave your company, whether they've left it or they're planning on leaving it today. And the number one reason given for the reason that people leave their companies is because their managers have an inability to lead. The number one reason, it's not money, it's because their managers have an inability to lead. The number 2 reason is that the organization, they have no faith in the organization's ability to have a future because of lack of leadership. Number 3 is they have no control over the direction of their jobs. They lack growth opportunities within their organization. They are not part of a collaborative team. And the 6th reason that people give, number 6, all the way down on the list, is money. So a lot of companies want to throw dollars at attrition problems, and in reality, there's 5 other things we could be doing, and they're all related to your leaders in your organization. So kind of a quick math. I love to do math problems, being from Morenci High School. The average cost to replace an employee is 150% of their salary. Okay? So if you have an employee that makes $50,000, 150% of that is $75,000 it costs to replace the one. Let's say we use the industry average of 10%, and you have 1,000 employees. It's costing you $7.5 million a year to replace employees if you have 1,000 employees. If you have 10,000 employees, like some of the bigger companies in this room, it's costing you $75 million a year to replace those guys. And I'm sure anybody in here can figure out a better use for that money. And I'm not saying all attrition's bad, because you do need to have some people leave the business, but for the most part, we work hard to recruit and train people. We should be developing them and keeping them. I was just sharing a story with some of the guys that I've been talking to today that I've known that I like to compare this to any professional organization. We're no different in this industry. I like to use a football analogy because I like football. I like to paint a picture using names like Matt Leinart, we're in Arizona, so I can use Matt Leinart's name, or Johnny Manziel or Tim Tebow, right? Those 3 gentlemen, what they had in common was they're all Heisman Trophy winners, right? They're all the best at what they did in college. They were all highly recruited first-round draft picks by their organizations. They were going to be the savior of their organizations, and all 3 of them failed miserably, right? And it's because it was assumed, like all of us are guilty of, that because they were good at what they did before, they were going to automatically be good at what you were throwing them into. You're a good college quarterback, you should be able to lead a professional organization. There was no development time. Let's compare them to Russell Wilson, Tom Brady minus the football and the air incident, and Joe Montana. These guys, they were good college quarterbacks, but they weren't first-round draft picks. They were late-round draft picks. They didn't win any awards, and they didn't start right out of the gate. They all had time to develop, normally behind a more veteran quarterback who was able to coach them one-on-one and teach them and develop them. The quarterback coach, who was probably a quarterback themselves, had time to work with them. And I would say that, quite frankly, they had a little bit better, more successful career than the first three that I mentioned. The other thing that I caution folks about when it comes to training is the one-size-fits-all training programs, where if a consultant comes in and says that it's not necessarily to have led in your industry for them to be able to teach and develop your people on leadership, I guess I would throw out there that pro football teams don't hire baseball coaches to coach their people. And if there is a consultant trying to sell you on the fact that if they worked in another industry and leadership is leadership, they're probably trying to sell you on the fact that they've never led in the industry that you're in and hoping that you'll buy off on it. I normally have a PowerPoint. I'm having to read notes. I'm sorry about looking down all the time. So another advantage of developing leaders in any industry, but if you develop transformational properties, and we're going to get into the conversation shortly about what transformational and transactional are, is that anything that you develop in them, they're going to pass down to, their followers. So it's a self-perpetuating situation where if you can train a handful, then it's going to be like a pond in the water. You're going to have them training. The next group's going to train, and eventually you're going to have a group of leaders instead of a group of followers. So I guess the ultimate thing that I'm wanting to share with you today is that if our goal is to have a bunch of robotic type, non-thinkers working for us that just follow orders, then go ahead and continue training them. Your money's being well spent. But if you want some innovative thinkers, they're going to keep you competitive as commodity prices decline, then you need to consider putting the money where it's going to be best suited into the development of these individuals. I kind of want everybody just to briefly do an exercise with me and think about the attributes of the worst boss you ever had. Just in your mind, just a couple of things that, why you hated working for that person. And keep that in mind, and I'll do the same thing with the best boss you ever had. And I'm not asking for names because it might get people in trouble in the room. But just get a picture of what your best boss and your worst boss, what made them that to you. And I want to talk a little bit about, we're going to use the term transactional and transformational leadership. So a transactional leader is somebody who's interested on keeping the ship afloat today. They're disciplinarian. They use discipline and reward as their leadership style, if you would, and they're concentrating on just getting through each day, day by day. There's fancy titles for the two different styles of transactional leaders. One's management by exception, which is your disciplinarian. They put out rules and regulations. They throw out KPIs, key performance indicators, and when you don't make it, they smack you with a stick for it, right? They come down on you because you didn't make your numbers, your production totals. When I did my research in mining, I spent 3 years researching almost every mining company you can think of, talking with, communicating with, extracting data from. The number one leadership style in mining today, from my research, is management by exception. Our industry leads by rules, regulations, and numbers. The second form of transformational or transactional leadership is called contingent reward. That's where you're offering them an incentive, some kind of a pay incentive, some kind of a reward for their performance. If you guys have heard the term carrot and stick, that's transactional leadership. You got a carrot, a reward, you got a stick if they don't do it right, and that makes very good followers but doesn't make very good leaders. Transactional leadership, I use the term that management by exception is the research I did was prominent in our industry. Transactional leadership is the most prevalent type of leadership in all industry. So it's not just mining that's leading this way, it's the world. So transformational leadership, these are the folks that are looking into the future, right? The first one's called idealized influence. This is your natural leader, your charismatic leaders, the guys that you would follow over a cliff, right? I use that term sometimes. And you won't follow them over the cliff just because you're a sheep. You'll follow them over the cliff because if they're going over, whatever's on top of that cliff's probably worse. So those types of leaders, there's lots of examples out there. I mean, I've heard that term used against, like President Reagan and folks where those of us who were in the military serving for President Reagan, I'd have followed him over a cliff. Next one it's called intellectual stimulation, and that's where you get buy-in. You bring in your crews and you let them help you solve the problems. I would hope that the people in this room, if you're in leadership position, you understand that you don't have to have all the answers. And probably the folks that you work with, the folks on your team, have the answers. We just haven't asked the right questions to get them out of them. So that's what intellectual stimulation is about when you're a transformational leader, is drawing those resources and that information out of your team. Next one's inspirational motivation. That's your coach and your mentor. These are the persons that they get out there and they work alongside their crews. They're not managing from their office, or you can't lead from an office. You have to be out there with your teams and inspiring them by being with them. And then the final one there in transformational leadership is called individualized consideration. And what that is just knowing your people. Is it not treating them like a number? You got to know their families. You got to know their needs, their wants. And those are the characteristics or attributes of a transformational leader. So now let's kind of step back to that little exercise I had you do. So the bad boss. Probably the carrot and stick approach. Is that, can we agree? The bad boss is the one that leads by numbers, beats you up when you don't get the numbers. And the good boss, for those of you that thought of attributes of a good boss, it's the guy that worked alongside you, knew who you were, got you to work alongside and intellectually stimulated you so that you were part of the team. They listened to your insights. So, I mean, it's stuff you already know. I'm not telling you anything new. I'm just giving you some context around what you've already figured out through the trial and error that is our lives, right? So how do we become transformational or transactional? I've been asked that by a lot of folks, what makes us one or the other? And quite frankly, is it 40% of how you lead today is your parents' fault? So blame it on mom and dad, okay? That's what I do. Both my parents are deceased, so it's easy. Nobody can argue with me. The next part in the percentages is the teachers. It's your teachers, it's your coaches, it's those folks that you interact with between age 5 and age 18. And then the next group are your religious leaders, and then all the way down to the far end, you are influenced in leadership by television personalities. I hate to say it, but I had a friend that his daughter just had to have surgery done on her lips because there's this Kendall Jenner thing where they suck these cups and it makes their lips puff out like Botox, and she got a blood clot and had to have surgery, and now she's got a portion of her lip missed. So yeah, I mean, even entertainers have followers, which makes them leaders, not necessarily in a good way. So how does this form what the leader you are today? Is that your leadership, your most informative years are age birth to 5 years old, right? That's what, if you pick up any survey, they're going to tell you birth to 5 years old, that's your most informative years. So how are you taught? How are you led? How do you become a follower during that time? Because normally you have one-on-one coaching by a parent or a caregiver. For those first 5 years of your life, there's somebody there. They're either praising you for doing something right, telling you why you did it right. They're telling you why you did something wrong, or they're keeping you from killing yourself as a kid. And that happens right up until you turn 5 years old. And then what changes is they relinquish you to school systems. And now instead of having one-on-one coaching, you're in a classroom full of 20. And you got 1 on 20, 1 on 30 or more. And there's other influences that start to impact your life. Instead of having a carefully controlled group around you, there's lots of influences that happen as you progress through school. So that's kind of the journey that we follow. We start out very transformational. You have that one-on-one coach, and then we develop past that into the more transactional folks that we become as adults just because of our environment. So what I like to recommend to folks is to stop doing 5 things today, and you'll start down the path of improving your own leadership style. And the first one is, and it's going to make a few folks mad, is to stop the idea that there's such a thing as best practice. Okay? Best practice is, right now, the most prevalent form of herd mentality that there is out there. Trying to be the same as somebody else is not going to gain you a competitive advantage in any way. Okay? What you want to be looking for, instead of protecting the status quo, the best practice is to look to next practice. You guys have all been through, I'm sure, some continuous improvement training of some kind, and you'll hear the term best practices, but you can rest assured that there's no such thing. It's next practice is what you should be striving for, continually improving everything that you do. The second one is cost cutting. Stop cost cutting. Where's the finance people we have to get an AED out for? You're never going to beat your competition to the future by cutting cost, okay? What you have to do is you have to invest smarter than they do, okay? So if you got an opportunity that's outside your budget that's $100,000 that's going to make you $200,000, why wouldn't you pursue it? So it's smarter investment. It's not about, cost cutting. You're never going to outperform anybody by performing through the measures of risk management. You need to be managing by opportunity. You can't focus on containing expenses. You need to focus on return on investment. So I know that for finance folks and people managing budgets, that's counterintuitive, but nobody's ever succeeded by trying to cut cost. It's just better management of your expenses. The third one is political correctness. And I don't know about a lot of you, but I know from political correctness is, its very nature is disingenuous and very dishonest. It replaces individuality with watered down rhetoric. Nobody's going to throw anything at me yet? It basically turns everybody sitting in the room into a bunch of brainwashed sheep. I mean, some of us are old enough to remember the days when you were allowed to speak your mind in a meeting. The boss wasn't wanting to hear what they wanted to hear. They wanted to hear your actual opinion. And that's what political correctness has done for us, is turned us into a bunch of deer in the headlights trying to figure out what he wants to hear or she wants to hear, instead of telling them the truth. You have 30 years, 40 years, 20 years of experience. You've been hired to do a job, and they're not allowing you to do that job and bring that 30 years of experience because of the whole political correctness type approach in our management structures today. The other thing is the propensity for us to lionize the few, which means if you tell people long enough and loud enough that they're not leaders, they're not going to ever be leaders, okay? So what we should be striving for is, instead of having a few leadership positions within our organizations, is to have everybody in our organization a leader. So, Nathan, how can you have a group of leaders? Nobody to follow. Well, when I say everybody to be a leader, is that in this situation, Steve may be the best one to lead this group and we all follow him. But we're all capable of leading. It's just that we voluntarily agree to follow Steve in this one situation because he's I'm picking on Steve, but because he's the one that has the best attributes there. And then the fifth thing is the unwillingness to change. I'll guarantee that everybody in here has probably read articles that we are in an unprecedented time of change in this world. And the rate of change is actually outpacing all of us, our own abilities to lead and to unlearn and learn what it takes to keep being competitive. We struggle every day with just trying to keep up. And what we've got to start doing is to figure out how to get ahead of it. Because if all you're ever going to do is keep up, you're going to be in a bad situation the whole time. And if, heaven forbid, you're stuck in the past, or your organization's stuck in the past, you got a tough road ahead of you, because you're not going to be able to stay competitive. So I guess what I'm standing up here saying to all of you is to scrap leadership training in favor of leadership development, and go back and tell all your training program coordinators I said that. Give them my name and number. They can call and yell at me. Because, like I said, doing anything that keeps you status quo is putting you behind everybody else who's already decided that training isn't the way to get there. It's by developing your people. And I'll tell you, how many of you guys dread going to training? I mean, very few of us. I mean, I've been through just about every leadership training program you can think of. Wilderness adventures. I got sent to a cooking class as a leadership training. I mean, that has nothing to do with leadership. Made my wife happy because I can cook something now. But it had nothing to do with leadership, and there's just way too many of those trendy little things out there that are making consultants and folks that are offering training programs rich, but aren't helping any of you get ahead of the game. So, like I said, I would say that we scrap training and we turn it into leadership development, which is something that's actionable. And it has to be done at the work site. It has to be customized individually for the person, because what I need developed in is totally different than what any one of you needs to be developed in. So there's absolutely no way to have a one-size-fits-all development program. And then the very last thing that I do like to mention to folks is that I'm talking about a lot of, I think somebody used the term when I was talking to them earlier, fuzzy or soft skills, and they're hard to measure. And that's not necessarily true. Is that the first thing that I recommend you do before you set up any type of leadership development program is that you go out and there's lots of these neuroscience-based programs out there that will help you understand how your people best learn and how they best teach. So you have to understand that before you even start trying to teach somebody is how they learn. Because quite frankly, today when you're giving somebody training or development and they're not getting it, you probably think they're stupid. But the reality is they probably just don't learn the way that you're trying to teach them. So you need to understand, as the person in a leadership position, how these individuals learn before you ever start trying to teach them anything. The second part of it is that how do you find out, how do you measure somebody's leadership abilities, is that the people that are in leadership positions, is you can do a 360 review on these folks and find out what their peers, what their supervisor, and what the people who are supposed to follow them think of them. Because when you do those 360 reviews, one part of that, they self-rate themselves. And I've seen thousands of these things, and everybody rates themselves transformational, even though they didn't know what the word was. But when you look at the reviews coming back from the people that work around them or with them, very few of them are actually transformational in the view of the people that deal with them. They're transactional. So what you do from there is you build the development plan based on their strengths and weaknesses, again, customized to that individual, because Steve may be transformational in the way he leads as far as caring about his people, but needs a little bit of work on asking their opinion and intellectually stimulating them. So you develop the program from there, and then you can periodically test it using a very simple 360 review until the leader and the followers' opinions match. And then you've achieved at least that bit and piece of it. So again, I guess I'm running out of time, so I'm hurrying up. Leadership's not a destination. It's a continuous process, so there's no way to get done with it. I hate to tell that to you. You got to be always asking yourself what if and what's next if you want to keep ahead of the game. For the leaders that are asking and comfortable with what is today, you're going to get replaced by those what ifers, very shortly. And then the very last thing, like I said, I want to tell you is that leadership is defined by your followers, not by your title. So please, if you walk out of here and didn't hear anything else that I had to say, is think about what you're saying and what you're not saying every time you talk to the people that you're responsible to lead, how your actions and how your inactions are communicating your leadership style to them. And if you do that and you have that self-reflection, you've begun the path of leadership development, which is, again, like I said, where I think that we should be headed. So that's kind of it for me today. I appreciate everybody who listened to me stand up here and chat about this, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference. And I am available. I'll be here the whole time if you guys want to talk in more detail on any of these subjects. I love to talk about leadership. I'll even talk about Morenci if anybody wants to talk about Morenci. But that's it. I appreciate your time, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. He will be around, as he said, for the rest of the event if you need to talk to him. We really don't have time for question and answers. we're going to restart across the hall as close as we can to 1 o'clock. So thank you, and this concludes the luncheon. Yeah.